In the previous video, we already checked out the hypothetical example of GM's outsourcing. If you believe that outsourcing is a primary job killer, in other words, a lot of American workers lost their jobs permanently simply because of outsourcing, then we would expect a positive association between outsourcing and unemployment. The more we do outsourcing, the higher the unemployment. Here, in this video, let's check out the empirical evidence to see if that statement is true or not. Okay? Now, here, I'm pulling out is a Fred chart which has two curves. The blue curve is a share of imports of goods and services in GDP. Okay? We use it as a proxy for outsourcing. Now, here is the reasoning behind that. We believe that the more outsourcing we do, the more we're gonna import them back. You can think about the cars GM or Ford made in Mexico, or iPhones made in China. We eventually ship them back to the US market, right? So the more we produce overseas, the more we're gonna import them back. That's why we use the import ratio as a proxy for outsourcing. And on this chart, you can see the vertical axis is a percentage, okay? Because we're looking at the imports as a percent in GDP, and the horizontal axis is time. So we look at from late 1940s to the most recent years, okay? And when we look at this blue curve, you would say across the board, there's a pretty obvious upward trend. Okay? In other words, we do import more and more as a ratio in our GDP. Okay? So there's no doubt that American firms have been doing more and more outsourcing. Okay? The other curve we see here on the Fred chart, the red one, which is the unemployment rate. Okay? Now, we see a lot of ups and downs on the unemployment rate. This is an officially reported monthly rate. Okay? But again, across the whole sample period, you would probably find that there's no obvious trend about the unemployment rate. Okay? In other words, the average across these years is relatively stable. Okay? Is there a positive correlation between the import ratio and the unemployment rate? No, we did not find the positive correlation. In other words, this piece of evidence does not support the statement that outsourcing kills jobs. Okay? Or outsourcing is a primary job killer. Now, if we continue looking at the same curves, okay, but we just look at probably, focus on a more specific period, okay, instead of, over the decades. Now, that's the second Fred chart I'm showing you. This time, the red curve is an import ratio, okay? The blue one is the unemployment plus the total unemployment plus discouraged workers. Now, if you remember in the previous lectures, we said that, if these blue-collar workers permanently lost their jobs, they would probably quit looking for jobs. In other words, they become discouraged. Okay? If they become part of the discouraged workers, they won't be included when we calculate unemployment rate. To address that concern, here we look at the total unemployment plus discouraged workers, which is the blue curve here. Okay. Again, let's look at the specific period. You would find that, in late 1990s and early 2000s, the blue curve has a downward trend. Okay, it has the same downward trend between 2002 and 2008. Okay, during the same period, we find that the import ratio increases. Okay, again, from late 1990s to early 2000, and then from 2002 to 2008. Okay, if you just focus on these specific periods, you might be under the impression that, instead of a positive correlation between outsourcing and unemployment, we actually have a negative correlation. In other words, you probably tend to say that outsourcing actually creates more jobs than what we lost. Okay? But we got to be very careful when we draw that conclusion, because here it could be, there's something else. There's a third factor which drives these two trends. For example, we find that unemployment rate declines during these two periods when the economy did better, right? Remember, the shaded areas are the recessions. So in between, these are economic expansion periods. So when we do the economy overall did better, we create more jobs. So unemployment plus discouraged workers decreases. And when the economy did better overall, we will have more money in our pockets. So we're going to buy more, and we will probably buy more from overseas. So that's why our import ratio increases. Right? Again, the most important point we want to get across here is, at least we don't have any positive correlation between outsourcing and unemployment, right? That's why, so here again, if you look at during the recession periods, you would still find this negative correlation. Okay, but as we said, it could be driven by some omitted factors. Okay, so here we would like to say that unemployment is primarily a macroeconomic issue instead of trade issue. Now, what we mean by that? A macroeconomic issue, it means it fluctuates along the business cycle. So when the macroeconomy is strong, we see the unemployment decreases. When the macroeconomy suffers, we see it shoots up, right? So it fluctuates along with the business cycles. Instead of trade issue, that means it's not really driven by the import ratio or by outsourcing. And so this is what we are talking about, okay? And the influence of outsourcing upon structural and cyclical unemployment. Okay. Now, if the outsourcing is not the primary job killer, who is the primary job killer? Okay. Who accounts for who leads to the majority of the jobs we lost in the past few decades? We're going to check this out in the next video.